Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this special LPB program in response to the president's address tonight concerning the oil spill crisis in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm Shauna Sanford, and I'm joined by a distinguished panel of guests who have been on the ground. They've seen the oil up close and its effects, and they're monitoring the situation closely. Joining me tonight are Dr. Ed Overton, an environmental scientist with LSU, Aaron Viles, who's with Gulf Restoration Network, and Mike Voisin, commissioner with the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, and he's also with the Louisiana Seafood Promotions and Marketing Board. They all have very strong opinions about what's happening and the response from the state and federal governments, as well as British Petroleum. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here tonight. Really appreciate having you here.
Thanks for having us.
And I'm really very curious to get your reaction to what we just heard from the president tonight, his first address from the Oval Office. Dr. Overton, we'll start with you.
Well, I was disappointed that we only heard about half of the speech referring to specifically this spill, and the rest of it was pushing an energy policy which needs debating and needs movement. But we're right in the middle of a war, and we need to focus and concentrate every effort organized to attack this oil and keep it from causing more damage than it's already caused. We've just learned today that the volume of oil is a lot more than we anticipated. So I didn't hear specifics, and I was disappointed that there wasn't more organization, if you will. It looks to me like we've got 3 or 4 states. We've got the state doing their thing, the federal government overseeing that. I didn't see General Honore in the crowd, and frankly, we remember what it was like when he took over in Katrina. I mean, things dramatically improved, and I know it's apples and oranges. It's not going to dramatically improve, but I would have liked to have heard a bit more specifics on this spill and not using this as an opportunity to push an energy policy, which, by the way, I think needs developing, but we're in the middle of a battle. And we've got to battle the oil right now.
And interestingly enough, the president used that sort of terminology as well. He said that we are in the middle of a battle, that a war is being waged. Very strong language from him that we really haven't heard before.
I was happy to hear that. We just need to follow that up with specific actions and not rhetoric. We don't need any more commissions to study this. We need action to get the oil off the water right now.
Aaron, your reaction?
I think it's similar. Clearly, you can't watch what's happening in our coastal estuary and on the surface of this accident and be pleased with the response. But just asserting that the federal agencies are doing a lot is insufficient. We were in D.C. last week to talk to the Natural Resources Committee, the Subcommittee on Oceans, and that's what we heard from the government witnesses there, was that we're doing so much, whether it was from Fish and Wildlife or whether it was from NOAA. But that is just not true. They're not doing enough. And I think we needed a change in game plan out of this speech, and we didn't get it. I was hoping to hear that the Navy or some branch of the military other than the Coast Guard was put in charge, because the Coast Guard is an underfunded agency, and we need somebody who's able to bring a new command and control structure here. And I think, whether it's the Navy or some other branch of the military, we need somebody directing BP's resources, directing the Cajun Navy to protect our wetlands far more effectively, because it's a mess out there right now.
Mike?
Well, I was pleased that the president has made so many trips down here to the Gulf, and pleased that he used the Oval Office to present to us his views relating to this. I agree with both Aaron and Ed about there is some disappointment, though, but I also have pleasure that he's taking this to the commander-in-chief level, and he's talking about it as a commander-in-chief. I am concerned about his challenge relating to the moratorium on oil and gas exploration in this area. From a seafood perspective, you might be surprised that I support lifting that moratorium immediately. My family, half of them work in the oil and gas community, half of them work in the seafood community. We've coexisted for over 50 years in coastal Louisiana. We don't need a death knell put into our economy locally. When the Cajuns were sent out of Canada, that basically families were separated. This moratorium will separate families. It'll send some of the families to Brazil, some of them to Russia, and some of them to Africa. We don't need that in South Louisiana. We don't need the decimation again of the Cajun culture that we have down here. I was pleased that he spoke about the fishing community. What I didn't hear and what I was waiting for him to say was how he enjoyed the seafood here the last few days that he's been down in the coast. He's eaten seafood, I think, at every one of his meals. And I'm very pleased that he has, and he said it in other presentations. The seafood is available and fresh. Louisiana, only about 70% of the coast, is open. Of our 7,500 miles of shoreline, only about 180 miles has actually been oiled. There's closures that are precautionary. We need to take more aggressive action. I agree wholeheartedly with that. The commission concept, I hope, doesn't slow the process down. Appointing a group to look at something that they're not that knowledgeable about may slow things down, and I'm concerned about that.
We have so much to get into in just the short amount of time that we have, but let's go back to this moratorium issue. Help us to understand, because the president says we need to find out exactly why this happened so that it does not happen again. And he says clearly, I understand the hardship that this is going to cause, but we don't want to bring more hardship should this happen again. Can you understand that?
Oh, I understand.
And how does that play into the families out there that certainly do rely on this for their livelihoods?
I completely understand his concern, and that's why immediately after this accident, he sent his people out there, and they basically gave a clean bill of health to the oil and gas operations that are exploring in the deep water areas. If we have to, let's put on a third-party engineer to make the actual decisions on the rigs. Let's make sure that we keep that economy moving forward. We're talking about tens of thousands of jobs in coastal Louisiana. Mm-hmm. The oil and gas community produces oil below the surface. The seafood community produces seafood above the surface of the seabed. We've worked hand in glove for a long time. We need to continue to do that. We don't want to accept any inaction. As the president indicated, he didn't want to accept inaction. We need action. We need things happening. We need the oil picked up. His three-point plan is very clear. He wants cleanup, recovery, restoration, and he doesn't want it to happen again. But I felt a little bit like post-Katrina. I remember post-Katrina, about day 3, Governor Blanco was going to make a statement, and what she asked everybody to do in the country, her call to action in our state was to pray. And that's what I heard the president say tonight. We need to pray for the people of the Gulf. I believe in prayer. I'm a man of faith, but I also am a man of action. I think that faith precedes action, and action creates faith. And we need more action, and we accept all the prayers people will give to us, but we need that action to occur right now.
Well, let's talk about what is happening, what isn't happening. He referred to, or some have referred to, the chaos of the cleanup effort. And I know that you all have been down there and you've seen it firsthand. So explain to those who have not been down there, really how chaotic is it?
Well, I think the assets are not being deployed effectively. We know that this is a vast and extensive coastal estuary, and it's very challenging to defend it all. And I mean, ultimately, we will not succeed in defending all of it from BP's crude oil. Mm-hmm. But we could have a better system in place to ensure that we're doing everything in our power. And I think what we have seen is a lot of BP contractors not working hard, not having a good plan, miscommunication, so that boats aren't where they need to be. Mm-hmm. Boom isn't being maintained and deployed and cleaned and redeployed. And so it has been characterized by many that have been actively involved with it as a mess. And that's unfortunate, because that's what we're trying to stop here, is a mess. And so that's why we keep coming back to this need for a better command and control structure. And if I can, going back to that moratorium, I know there are a lot of people who are concerned about it, and I understand the concerns of coastal communities who are looking at their future and having some significant questions about them. And these are communities that hadn't recovered from 2005's hurricane season or 2008's hurricane season. But I think it would be irresponsible to look at what's happened with deep water drilling, and that it's been exposed as a high wire act without a net, mm-hmm. and that we clearly have the industry has no plan B. Once a blowout preventer valve fails, there's nothing they can do that's effective except for a relief well, which are months away.
Right.
So how could we say, yes, let's keep doing this, without a good understanding of what went wrong and why, and what are the standards we need to change to ensure it never happens again? Because right now, as much as these aren't frequent, they certainly do occur. Blowouts happen. There was one last year in Australia, and if it happened again, where are the resources to defend Texas's coast or Florida's coast if the currents go taking it from a different spot to a different direction? So I just really think we need to get a handle on this deep water development, and if we can respond effectively and adequately, which right now we clearly can't, but also if these energy companies who've been here for 100 years really doing what they want in our coastal system. I mean, we're losing 25 square miles of coastal wetlands every year. About half of that is because of the oil industry activity in our coastal marshes. Let's not forget that. So the idea that we've let them do pretty much what they want in our coastal system, and now they're threatening to leave, kick this community when it's down, when we're trying to clean up their mess. I mean, who's the bad guy here?
Yeah, Dr. Overton, I'd like to get your comments on that and wonder, and Mike, I'd like for you to jump in too and wonder if you have any pause whatsoever, because we've learned so much from the congressional hearings that these oil companies, sure, they presented plans should some sort of disaster happen, but they're pretty much all the same plans, and we're realizing and finding out that they're not plans that they can follow through with.
Well, that's exactly the point I was going to make. They had a contingency plan. It was to skim a lot of oil off the surface, 15 to 20 million barrels a day. It's not put in place. There was no implementation. There was no follow-through of the plan. I doubt if anybody had ever read the bloody thing. And obviously, when they talk how walruses in the Gulf, that they're referring to a plan that's not even up to date and adequate. So it's one thing for one company to act irresponsibly. I'm not sure all the companies in the Gulf. I'm kind of sitting right in between both this moratorium, not doing it. I think we've clearly seen what happens when people act irresponsibly, and this certainly was. The testimony coming out of Congress is damning, to say the least. It's certainly human error was a major factor in this. I'm not so certain how bad the engineering was. I mean, you can't engineer anything that people can't damage. And it looks to me like this blowout preventer was engineered and things were done such that it was damaged enough that it did not work. Is that a mechanical engineering design flaw, or is it human error flaw? Now, how did we get around human error? We didn't get around it in the Titanic. You just go right down the list of the Challenger disaster. All of these things have human error. So what are we going to do? Clearly we need a better energy policy, but the think that we're going to get off oil is pure folly. Everything in this room right now started off as petrochemicals. This desk is made of glue that was made from oil. Portions of the shirt, the mic, the cell phone, the cameras, everything in your house. So we need a transition, and we need to start planning now. But it's going to be a century-long transition. It's not going to happen, and we've got to have the money to do this. Now, how do we do this? Where are we going to get the oil, the energy? Clearly, we've got to stop saying, I'm not going to have any nuclear energy around. Nuclear energy is not a carbon-producing energy. It has risks, though. 3 Mile Island is a perfect example.
Right.
But we're going to have risk in our society, unfortunately.
I want to stop you there for just a moment, because you're asking the questions that need to be answered, and isn't that what the president is saying? We need answers to those questions. And what about the comments from Aaron concerning the moratorium?
They're fair, and they're a point of view. The bottom line is, if we have an airplane accident, we don't ground all airplanes. We may check airplanes. We send inspectors out there, similar to the response to this originally, but we don't stop air traffic in this country. When there's a trucking accident on the road, we don't stop trucks from leaving the road. We continue that economy rolling forward. We need to do what we need to do to protect and make sure this doesn't happen again. I hope a lot of good comes out of this. Clean energy is something I dream of. My whole 7 generations in the seafood business depend on a clean environment. But also, I need to be able to energize that business that I have. I drove here in an automobile. My vessels use diesel to run. My crews get to the docks in cars. We need, as Dr. Overton indicated, longer periods of time. The president talked about decades tonight, and he needs to do it in this decade. I remember when John Kennedy said we'll get to the moon by 1969, and I remember watching us step on the moon. I'm not sure that we're capable in 10 years of getting to totally clean energy. I would like to, and I support that concept, but the thing that runs this country, the fuel that gives it the economic boost, because we're such high energy users, 20% he talked about tonight, we only produce 2% of it. It's what creates the economy of America is hydrocarbons. We can't overnight change this. And if we try overnight, what we're going to do, as I talked about earlier, he talked about the cost to our children without action. He talked about blessings of the fleet. all of this will leave. You know, our seafood community is challenged today. Normally, when the seafood community is challenged, those individuals can go into oil and gas and develop an income. When the oil and gas community is challenged, those people transition into the seafood community. Shutting both of those down, South Louisiana doesn't become a ghost town, but becomes an economic nightmare, worse than what we're dealing with just this oil spill.
I've got to let Aaron jump in there because I can tell you have lots to say.
Well, I don't think anyone was talking about overnight. So I heard the president not say overnight about a transition, but you have to put the challenge out there and you have to get moving towards it. So for us to say, well, we can't do it overnight, so let's just wait, is irresponsible. We need to start transitioning our transportation sector off of oil. Like, I don't think most people care how their car gets from point A to point B, whether it's electric engine or whether it's internal. I mean, there are some people who are very fond of internal combustion engines, but by and large, people just want to get there safely, quickly. And at a reasonable cost. So we can do that. We can move our transportation sector off of oil quite simply by making it happen. So clearly we're not going to be running planes off of biofuels anytime soon. Oil and gas will always be here. It will likely always be in the Gulf of Mexico because that's the area of the map we've circled. We've allowed it to become a natural sacrifice zone, and the coast of California and Florida are not rushing in to fill the need. So that means it's going to likely be here. We need to make sure it's safe. We need to make sure that we do not ever experience something like this again. And that's, I guess, in my mind, the most important thing is how do we learn from these lessons? I think he laid out a pretty decent plan on a number of them, though, and I was very excited to hear about the idea of the restoration of the Gulf Coast. It's something we didn't even touch on, and it's critically important for our region to have our coastal wetlands robust and protected and restored. And so I was very glad to hear a national address where it was one of the three main points about what they're going to be doing as a nation, and it's long past time for that kind of federal engagement.
And not just restored to what it was before the spill on April 20th, but to what it was. And that's a major, major undertaking, and that's an undertaking that your organization is certainly devoted and committed to. So we're talking about a huge, huge effort. I had an opportunity to go out to an area where the pelicans are nesting. We're at the height of pelican season, and you can see just how destructive coastal erosion really, really is for people who really have no concept of it. It is real out there, and we're going to take a look at that because this crisis has now been declared the worst oil spill in the nation's history, surpassing the Exxon Valdez disaster. And I recently traveled to a barrier island known as Cat Island in the Gulf to get an up-close look at how this is really impacting thousands and thousands of brown pelicans. Just recently, the pelicans were taken off the endangered species list, but that may now be in jeopardy.
To see that kind of concentration of fantastic life, and to see it surrounded by the impacts, the poison of oil, is just really heartbreaking.
Barrier islands like these are invaluable to migratory birds such as the brown pelican, but with the invasion of crude oil, their nesting haven is now threatened.
I'm afraid this is a scene that we're going to start seeing a lot more frequently in the days to come, in the months to come.
See the 5 pelicans to the left standing in that brownish looking stuff? They're standing in the oil.
Captain Chris Calloway has been making a living on the water for years. To say he's angry about what has happened is an understatement.
This is my office. How devastating do you think that is? Someone comes in and drops a mega bomb on your office, and then you go in and all your stuff's in there, the place that you love to work and everything. Tell me how you feel. Pisses me off.
At one point, Cat Island was one long continuous island, but due to coastal erosion, it's been broken up into several smaller islands. This is the main nesting ground for thousands and thousands of brown pelicans that were just recently taken off of the endangered species list. But the impact of the oil could cause a devastating setback. Boom has been put in place to protect the islands as much as possible, but much of it is now soaked in oil, and these birds are not out of harm's way. Maura Wood is with the National Wildlife Federation.
A pelican could dive in this water, dive through a slick or a sheen and get oiled. He could go back to his nest and rub it off on his egg or the chick. The pelican could preen its feathers to clean up. But ingesting that oil can cause liver damage or kidney damage. So 6 months from now or a year, perhaps that bird would die of the oil impacts, but we wouldn't know that.
The NWF has been working on an aggressive coastal restoration program in the state for years. Dr. Douglas Inkley, the organization's senior scientist, says the oil can do a lot of damage to the pelicans, including destroying their feathers, causing them to develop hypothermia.
You may not think they get hypothermia here where it's 80, 85 degrees, but remember, these are warm-blooded animals, and the water's not that warm. And so if they get the oil on their feathers and they lose that insulation, they get exhausted and can die.
He fears that the toxicity of the oil mixed with the potential poison of the dispersants is creating what he calls a bad brew that the marine and wildlife are forced to feed on.
They're using dispersants at a subsea level. It's experimental. It's not been done before. We really don't know what the impacts are. Another problem with the dispersants is BP won't tell us what's in it. So we don't really know what they're putting into our water by the hundreds of thousands of gallons.
This oil is about as thick and gooey and disgusting as any that I've seen. The weathered oil, as it comes up, can have two impacts. It can be toxic, but as it weathers, it gets a little less toxic, so we don't know exactly how toxic this is, and it can smother.
The coast supports the livelihoods of thousands. Tuesday night, some of the people directly affected by the disaster showed up for a town hall meeting with Plaquemines Parish President Billy Nungesser. Nungesser told them he will build sand barriers to protect the waterways with or without federal approval.
We will apply for an emergency permit, and we hope the Corps hears us. Emergency. Don't beat it to death. Look at what we're asking for, and look at what's at risk. If the risk of doing nothing outweighs issuing that permit, then issue the permit. But if they don't, make no mistake, we're going to work. We will not lose all of the marshlands of Plaquemines Parish. We're not going to sit by and wait.
A representative from BP also addressed the crowd.
What's going to happen is over the next few months, BP is going to be tested to make it right with you for what has happened. We regret what has happened. We want you to know that no one has intentionally tried to harm you, but we did.
Still, the fishermen had questions and they wanted answers.
Why are we still spraying a dispersant that BP don't even allow in their own country? This is poisoning our waters. You're killing everything in the waters. Once it gets into our marshes, who knows what the long-term effects are going to be?
We've had this conversation. I just have to respectfully disagree. In my opinion, the lesser of the two evils certainly is to disperse the oil far out at sea.
Find something cheaper, better, and less toxic, because if it gets into our fragile marshland, we are going to be in deep trouble. We are not going to have an industry left.
I don't think that anybody to this date can give us a definitive answer as to what the future damage or, quite honestly, the current damage that exists in our marsh. So I don't think those are appropriate answers, but thank you for your time.
You're probably right.
The estuaries that fringe Louisiana's coastline are some of the most productive ecosystems in the world, supporting more than 400 species of fish, plants, and wildlife.
The Exxon Valdez was 21 years ago, and although some species have recovered, they have not recovered fully. And there are other species like herring that haven't come back. Will we be dealing with a similar thing here? It seems likely.
We need to have much greater transparency from BP, no matter what it may cost them. It is not their water, it is the nation's water that is being polluted by this oil. And I think our citizens have a right to know exactly what's happening and how big this is.
And I think we can all agree that probably one of the saddest sights of this entire disaster is seeing those birds, those oiled birds, and really just feeling so helpless. And I know that you have seen them quite a bit, Aaron.
I mean, it's the iconic image of this disaster, I think, are those brown pelicans in such dire straits. And I think everyone sees that and wants to help and wants to do something. And I think really what we need to do is get behind this 3-point plan that the president laid out. I mean, sure, we all had critiques of whether it was sufficient and whether the detail was what we needed, but by and large, you cannot, you shouldn't argue with what we need to do, and that's clean up this Gulf. We need to restore the wetlands, and we need to make sure that our communities are made whole, and that we never go through this again. And that means, of course, the stuff that he laid out, reforming MMS. Clearly, that agency was a lapdog and not a watchdog. It was literally and figuratively in bed with the industry. And it is certainly time to make sure that the folks who collect the money aren't the same ones who inspect the rigs and make sure that what they're doing is safe and adequate to protect these resources. So those are all things that need to happen, and I think we need to make them happen.
Well, I know that probably the consensus here is the last thing that we need is another commission. But in fact, he says that he's going to develop a commission that will be a watchdog and not a partner with the oil industry. And we're talking about the money involved here and the fact that he is talking about restoring the coastal wetlands. You could see in that piece that the barrier islands there, they've been decimated. They've been destroyed. So, Dr. Overton, you were talking about why this is so very pivotal to get the money.
Well, absolutely. These offshore oil-rich waters are producing hundreds of billions of dollars every year. And some of that, a significant portion of that, needs to be plowed back in to support the infrastructure, which to some extent has been lost, as Aaron pointed out, by coastal erosion, by channeling in the marshes. So our whole coastline, it's shocking to fly over and see what isn't there after the hurricanes and after all of the efforts to exploit resources in the coastal zone. We have an opportunity now. Let's take advantage of that and start restoring our coastal wetlands. That will restore the marine life as well, because the base of all the marine life food chain is in the wetlands. I mean, this is a great opportunity, but we've got to put the money where the mouth is. We can't support Martha's Vineyard wind farms with mineral management service money. I mean, we can't support North Dakota's flood protection. We've got to support actions in and along the Gulf Coast now.
Well, we are winding down here, and so I want to give you each an opportunity to close, and Mike, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you, Shauna. It's been a pleasure to be here with you. And a lot of times in life, people aren't really interested in the storms that you meet at sea. They're interested in whether you bring the ship in safely to the dock. This is one of those storms that we're faced with. Cajun people are resourceful. The people in South Louisiana are very able to deal with this. We're a resilient group. It's not the strong that survive, not the most intelligent, but those that adapt to change. We will adapt to change. We can't have our economy fall apart and be decimated through the challenges we're faced with right now. We need to be held up. The 3-point plan needs to be given details and it needs to be implemented. I support and stand behind the President in that effort, and I look forward to moving forward in this area.
All right, Aaron, just a few seconds here.
Well, I think this was, the overall vision he laid out is what we need as a region. It's going to be the details. The devil's always in the details. And of course, we need to identify the funding streams necessary to restore our coastal wetlands and make sure these communities are made whole. And hopefully BP is going to follow through on their commitments to our communities.
And Dr. Overton, 10 seconds.
My 3-point plan is skim offshore, skim near shore, and suck onshore. Get that oil off of our environment now, and don't wait for commissions. Do it now. It has to be well coordinated, well organized, well supported, and it needs to be done right now. That's the plan we need today.
All right. Thank you all so very much, Dr. Ed Overton, Aaron Viles, Mike Voisin. We've learned so much, and thank you all out there. This, of course, will be an ongoing story for our state, our country, and, of course, for LPB. We will continue to keep you informed. In order to keep up with our continuous coverage, please visit our website at lpb.org/oil spill, and be sure to watch Louisiana, the state we're in, every Friday night at 7 p.m. For everyone here at Louisiana Public Broadcasting, thanks so much for watching, and have a good night.